Okay, so why don't we get started? I'll share my screen. Okay, so we're learning this halacha of a moser, and again, it's a lot of this does not have application to a benevolent government, but there is certainly the possibility of this existing today if a person were to try and get someone else in trouble deliberately, or to try to save oneself by implicating somebody else. Um, uh, so that's really what we're talking about in this halacha. If someone comes along and says, if the sheriff of Nottingham comes and says, "Where can I get straw, or where can I get any other commodity to confiscate?" and you say, "Well, I don't have, but you can go to that guy down the block," so that's usher. So the Imrei Yaakov says, Pirish lomi boy laleches me'atzmo lahalshin. He says, not only is it usher to voluntarily go to a person of authority to inform on a fellow Jew, olagalos matspun of the usher, that's usher. Ela afilu im hadover ba'mei ha'anas. But even when the authority is inquiring, let's say he's asking for a straw or some other commodity, the asr lomer sheyesh beveis ploni. You're not allowed to let the authority know, oh, if you're looking for something, you can find it at that house. And then, the very strong language is used in this halacha based on the language of Chazal, that a person who is a moser does not forfeits his portion in the world to come. And the Imrei Yaakov just adds to that, and he says, if you look at if you look at a number of different sources in Shas, you'll find a number of disparaging statements about a moser. The Amrina Nami beberakama de Rosh Hashanah, the Hamisuros Yordim leGehenim, that people who act as informants go to Gehenim, Vinidonim Ladore Doros, and are judged there for all future generations. It's like, you never get out. The Gufan Kala, Vinishmasam Kala, and their bodies and souls are both incinerated. Uvi Yoredeya Simin Beis Siftes Nispar Deyesh Poslam Shchitas Moser Kamo Shchitas Mumar. There's also an opinion that we know that certain Jews do not count as Jews as far as the mitzvahs that they do. Like, for example, just like a Gentile's slaughter is not valid, a non-observant Jew's slaughter is not valid, and some say that includes a moser. And it also says that if a Sefer Torah was written by a moser, even though he's a very pious scribe, nonetheless it's a pasula Sefer Torah. Rasha uval averos, that even if the person that you wish to inform on is a bad person and commits a lot of sins, hainu l'tei avon. And so, as just to clarify, this is a person who's not religious, and you want to inform on, that's usher. But that's only if the reason why he's not religious is because he's decided that he doesn't want the religious lifestyle anymore, because he would rather live a little bbut richly and more easily. But as we'll see in a later chapter, there's a person who's called a mumar lahachis. A mumar lahachis is a person who deliberately rebels against God in order to make a statement of sort of apicorsis, of heresy. And that kind of person, you're allowed to do whatever it takes to get him into trouble with the authorities. So again, very harsh words. Whether or not they apply today is very, very unclear. But let's go on. At least we're getting a little bit of a glimpse of certain medieval attitudes towards people who act as a thorn in the side of the Jewish community. Vafilu hu meitzar lo, and even if the person that you wish to inform upon is someone who causes you grief, you're still nevertheless not allowed to inform on them. Dafka mipnei tsar devarim. Aval im mafsido umitzaro b'mamon shori limsor shelo l'mosro shelo yafsidenu od im efshar be'inyan acher. He says the only time that you're not allowed to inform on someone is if he's just causing you grief by verbally harassing you. But if he's doing more than that, if he's causing you financial loss, and it's a continuous kind of action that he's doing, that he's causing, let's say he's a neighbor, and he's causing you continued financial loss by allowing his, I don't know, his sewer pipe to run onto your property or something like that. So you're allowed to report him to the authorities so that he doesn't cause you any further damage if there's no other way to deal with the issue. So in a situation where you have a neighbor and there's a dispute with the neighbor and you're trying to resolve it amicably, and the person just simply won't hear of it, and something on his property is causing damage to your property, just as an example. Or it could be that it's not a neighbor, but let's say it's a business associate, and he's taking actions that are causing you continued damage financially, and you know that he's doing something that is reportable to the authorities. So then, certainly in today's world, you have a right to do that, but it would be appropriate to certainly ask a shaila beforehand to make sure that what you're doing is not going to cause him, financial ruin, is going to cause him severe damage as a result. Okay, let's go on to the next statement. Meitzar lo. He says, if the person is causing you grief, dafka b'meitzar liyachid, aval hameitzar letzibor u'mitzarim muter l'masro bi'ar akum lahakoso ula'asro ulakanso. Only a person who's causing grief to an individual should not be reported to the authorities. But if there's a Jew in the community who is creating harm to the entire community or to an entire segment of the community, and he is causing them grief, so then you would be allowed to report them to the authorities, to even cause that person bodily harm, or to arrest them, or to put a fine on them. It was an interesting shaila. I will say this. I received this shaila more than once when there was a school during the height of COVID that was trying to surreptitiously stay open by lying to the authorities. And someone asked me if it was permitted for them to report this to the authorities. And it's really, the question really is, can you make the argument that entity, right, is not only doing something to cause grief or to make a chilul Hashem, but they're also damaging the entire Jewish community? And this is an interesting shaila. It's something that certainly gives us pause to think about. Would it be permitted to report criminal behavior to the authorities if your concern is that this is going to get all of the Jews in the community in trouble, even those who are trying to be law-abiding? So I never responded absolutely in the affirmative, but I also couldn't say definitively that you should not report them to the authorities, because it's really, really very unclear in that kind of situation. Okay. These halachas raise a whole bunch of different scenarios in one's mind, and each one of them would have to be approached individually. But even today, I do feel that we are going to continue suffering the repercussions of bad players in the Jewish community who basically flouted the law during COVID. And I don't know what to do about it, because someone just came over to me and said, He's trying to organize a group of community leaders to get politically involved. And I said, I don't think now's the time to create a political lobby for the Jewish community after what has happened during COVID. I think that we have a black eye and we have to sort of hide from the light for a little bit until things get a little, we put a little space between ourselves and what happened in the past. Anyway, I don't know what else to say about that. But so let's go on. Umitza'aro tamid, if the person is causing you constant grief, but it's only verbal grief, you're not allowed to maser him to the authorities. He says, even though words are very painful, and words can be more afflictive than being stabbed by a sword, you're still not allowed to report someone and get them in trouble. And the Gemara says, we learn this from a pasuk that David said in Tehillim, that I said that I will protect my ways from sinning with my tongue. And what that means is Eshmera lefi machsom ba'od rasha lenegdi. And he continued and said, I will guard my mouth and put an obstacle to it, even when the wicked person is in front of me. Derod Salomar, Avsharasha lenegdi umitzareni, which means that even though there's a wicked person who is causing me grief, then I still have to guard my mouth. Ba'od Amar, Dom Lashem v'yischol elo. The pasuk in Tehillim also says, be silent in the presence of God and supplicate before him. Derod Salomar sheyidom v'yispol v'Hashem yapilem lefanav chalolim. And what the import of that pasuk means is that if someone is causing you grief and they're belligerent and they're mean and so forth, then it's best to be silent and leave it up to Hashem to dole out the justice. So you shouldn't take revenge on someone who was just mean to you, and certainly it would be usher to maser on them to the authorities. But we also said in the Rav Shulchan Aruch that if a person has masered on you and is continuing to get you into more trouble, and the only way to save yourself from that person's reporting you to the authorities is to report them, so then it would be mutter to maser on them. Avalim efshel lahatzil atzmo b'derech acher, avi kishnayim shemasru ze'ezeh v'chol mi shehifsid chaver yoser chayv l'shalim hamosar b'nezek shalim. He says, but if there is a way to protect yourself from further damage without masering the guy, then it would be usher for you to maser on him. And if you do maser on him and you cause him damage, then the two of you could litigate in Beis Din and implicate each other. And potentially it's possible for both people to be in the wrong. The Beis Din would rule, okay, Reuven, and Shimon who get into a dispute, and Shimon masers on Reuven, and Reuven retaliates by masering on Shimon, and both of them incur financial damage as a result. Both of them can go to Beis Din. Beis Din will evaluate how much damage Shimon's masering caused to Reuven, how much damage Reuven's masering caused to Shimon, and then they'll take the difference and award it to the person who was damaged more. So you have to keep that in mind, he says. So, and then we said, Aval mishi hika chaveru ba'akrai aser afilu lemuka atzma lemosra. But if a person is not being continuously hounded by another person, but rather was just slapped in the face once, they got into a one-time fight, that would not be grounds to maser someone. It's only if someone is physically or financially oppressing you continuously, and this is the only way to protect yourself. But if a guy, hits you once, that doesn't justify your masering on him. And be'emes the milashon haramasim in shin peiches siv zayin mashma deshari Shekasav yesh omrim da adam hamuke mechavero yacholelech likbol lifnei akum. That the Ramah seems to imply that if a person was stricken, was punched by another Jew, then that's a reportable offense to the authorities. Even though that will cause great damage to the striker. But it seems, though, that even though he might be justified, but lechatchila we would encourage him not to report him to the authorities. And it's not so clear that everyone even agrees with the Ramah. But al kol panim nira degam ladas harama ein lahater elalamuka atzmo. But it seems that even according to the Ramah, only the person himself who has been physically stricken would be allowed to do the reporting. Aval adam acher ein lo shum heter limsar. But another third party would not have the right to do so. Amnam kishuhu roa shnaim miskotetim umakim zeba zev en yochol lahafrid beinehem istaber shemuter lahazik afilu mishtara shelakum. But he says, but if you see two people in an altercation, and they're mamish in a fight, and they're about to beat each other up, and they're in the process of beating each other up, so then it would seem that it's permitted to call the police. Even a non-Jewish police force would be perfectly fine in order to break up the altercation. There's a lot of discussion today, in previous years, the attitude was that if a person was assaulting other people, especially children, if a person was taking advantage of children, then some of the Rabbanim in previous years felt that no, we should shash still, let's handle this ourselves, and we won't get the authorities involved, because if you get the authorities involved, they'll take the guy, they'll destroy him, they'll destroy his wife, his children, the family will be destroyed, etc., etc. But that's not true anymore. And most of the big Rabbanim today, most of the Gedolei HaPoskim, the Rosh Yeshiva today, acknowledge that was a mistake. That was just a serious error in judgment. But it's all based on this attitude that you're seeing in this halacha, that you don't want to get the authorities involved. Handle it internally. When two Jews get into problematic situation where one is injuring the other, you don't get the authorities involved. As you can see, this is the pervasive attitude of this halacha, that it's a terrible thing to maser, right? But that's not true anymore. It's just not true. Now, the fact is that sometimes there is overreaction, on behalf of the authorities. Sometimes the authorities overreach and there's overzealousness, and that happens today as well. Even if the authorities suspect that there may be child abuse in a family unit, sometimes there is overzealousness, and they will take the child away without trying to work with the parents. And that has to be weighed very carefully. There's no question about that. But as a general rule, if you suspect that there's child abuse going on, whether it's a parent abusing their own child, or whether it's a teacher abusing a child, that person has to be reported to the authorities. Okay.
Rabbi, just I don't know if there's a parallel or not, but in a situation like that where the decision making is to keep it in house within the community or go to the authorities, is it not comparable a little bit when people are just trying to decide if they have whether it's through business or anything else, where they have court situations where they go to the secular courts or the Beit Din? Same. There could be certain commonalities there.
Yes, but there are significant differences also. There are commonalities, but there are differences too. And the difference is a person engaging in criminal behavior, or is there a legitimate dispute between two parties over finances? And I feel that other party has treated me unfairly, or owes me money and he hasn't paid me the money. That doesn't make a person a criminal. It may make him perhaps a bit dishonest or not, someone that I would want to do business with in the future. But I don't have a right, if he's another from Jew, to take him to a secular court. The halacha is very clear, and we learned this before, that you have to settle differences in a beis din. There are limitations to dina de malchus dina, right? So one of those limitations to dina de malchus dina is that when you have a financial dispute with somebody else, you have to take them to a beis din. But here we're talking about a person who's committing assault, a person who is doing something to physically harm somebody else or to sexually harm somebody else. And that's something that should not be tolerated even for a moment and should not be handled internally. Okay. Lachufo lamud ledina Yisrael. So the next piece over here says, let's see, what was the halach? What was he quoting? He says, "Asur likol alav lifnei sar lachufo lamud ledina Yisrael ad sheyito rishus mi beis din." You're not, if someone, let's say, you want to take someone to beis din, and they're refusing to go to beis din, you're not allowed to report that person to the authorities in order to coerce them to go to beis din. First, you have to consult with the beis din and see what the beis din has to say. You say to beis din, "I'm trying to get this guy to come to beis din." The beis din will send that person a summons. They'll send him a second summons, and they'll send him a third summons. If at that point the person refuses to go to beis din, the beis din will then give you permission to sue him in a secular court. But you don't have the right to take action independently. You have to wait for the beis din to give you that permission, to grant you that right to sue that person or to report him to the authorities. Okay, and so that's what this commentary is going on. Ma'isa be'echad sheratza lahachriach chavero b'din akum sheyasa lo din Yisrael. There was once a situation that's brought in the halachic works, in the case works, where a person wanted to use the secular authorities to coerce another Jew to abide by halacha, to abide by the financial law that would be the halacha if they went to beis din. V'chasher ratzah l'tovso v'lo hiniach atzmo hikahu hashofet ad shahargo. And the problem was that the person that was implicated refused to listen to the secular authority, and the secular authority came down hard on him for not complying with the Jewish law, and he ended up killing the guy because he started beating him. So that's again an example of where all of this suspicion and mistrust of secular authorities comes from, because obviously in the medieval world you didn't have police who were trained properly to restrain themselves. So this is what happened. A guy reported someone to the authorities just in order to get the guy to comply with the halacha. And the guy refused to heed the instructions or the orders of the police commander. And the police commander started to beat him until he died. V'dan maharam ala toveya din rodseach, afal pi shelo ratza lahachricho ela ledin Yisrael. And the maharam, which goes back, this is the Maharam Rottenberg, goes back to early medieval times, maybe 13th century, probably 13th century, that there's that the guy who reported him to the authorities has the din of a murderer for having reported him to the authorities. So again, you see this, you see that it depends on the society in which you live. If there's police brutality in the country that you live in, and the police overreact and they act in a crazy fashion, so then these halachas are much more pertinent and are much more relevant to that kind of scenario, where the police act with restraint and there are checks and balances within government to prevent abuses of its citizens by the authorities. so then many of these halachos don't apply. And we're going to see that in the next halacha. And that's what I want to read with you now, which is halacha zayin. Hamoser mutar lahargo b'chol makom afilu bizman hazeh kodem sheyimsor. He says that if a person is a maser, he's a moser, you're allowed to kill the guy even outside of Beis Din. And that applies nowadays. He's writing this in the 18th century. If you're attacking him and killing him, will prevent him from reporting you to the authorities. Ela sha'omer hareini moser ploni begufo b'mamono. He says, if you hear, as long as the guy just professes, I'm going to report you. I'm going to report you to the authorities just to get back at you. Afilu momon kal iter atzmalamisa. So even if he just says, I'm going to report you to the authorities so that they'll just take a small amount of financial stuff from you, he's opened himself up now for the death penalty. But this sounds crazy, right? A guy says, says to his neighbor, you either do this or I'm reporting you to the city commissioner, the zoning authority. What, so now you're allowed to kill the guy? Does that make any sense? So we'll have to see how this halacha is qualified. And so, but first you have to warn the guy. You have to tell him, hey man, you better not go to the authorities. And if he says, no, I'm going to maser you, or I'm going to maser him, mitzvah lahargo, then it's a mitzvah to kill him. B'chol hakodem zacha, and anyone who there's a bounty on his head, and any member of the Jewish community has a right to kill the guy. And why? Lefi shahaholech limsor mamon Yisrael biyad nachrim, who kirodef achar nafsho lemosra lahem. He says, because once you start informing on a Jew to the Gentile authorities, it's no different from trying to kill the person that you've informed on. So where does that correlation come from? The guy who's being victimized by being masered feels that he's he's a victim, and he feels that this person is getting him in trouble with the authorities and they're going to confiscate his assets. That gives me a right to kill that person. So he says, yes, it gives you a right to kill him, because once you inform on someone to the authorities, even if it's only for financial things, they will end up trying to kill you as a result. And you see quite clearly in the halacha, it calls the maser, the moser, it calls him a rodef, someone who's trying to kill you. And we know the halacha is if someone tries to kill you, you have a right to kill them in order to prevent them from killing you. And if there's no opportunity to warn him in advance because he's going quickly to the authorities, you don't even have to warn him. But if you can stop the guy from masering without killing him, such as you can maim him or injure him in some way, and he says the two examples are to cut out his tongue or to blind him, right? So then you're not allowed to kill him. So again, all of this is very disturbing language. This is probably causing you great disturbance. If it's not, then you're a little bit heartless. But you can see how language like this would, if it gets into the wrong hands, if it's misinterpreted and misapplied to modern times in the 21st century, you could easily see how this kind of language could cause some kind of fanaticism within a very fundamentalist kind of behavior, and would allow someone to justify doing terrible things to a fellow Jew.
Rabbi, what about the capos in the Second World War? Because they got a little bit more preferred treatment for a certain amount of time, anyways, from the Nazis. But they would probably fall into this category, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right, Ron. If a person was a capo and he was trying to get his fellow Jews in trouble, and there were capos who were murdered by the other inmates, and justifiably so. I mean, when you're in the concentration camp and you've got the capo ratting you out because you tried to bake a matzah or you lit Hanukkah candles or something like that, then definitely that capo deserves to be killed. And that's the kind of scenario that this halacha is trying to address, right? It's trying to address where, the authorities, once you've been snitched on, the authorities could come after you and kill you, and not just confiscate your stuff. So that's why you're allowed to kill the maser. Okay.
Rabbi, it sounds very similar to when we talk about if someone breaks into your house, you're allowed to kill them because if they find you, they'll kill you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the general din of a rodef, is that anyone that you feel is trying to potentially even kill you, you're allowed to stop them with lethal force if necessary, but only if there's no other way to stop them. And that's what we go on to the last part. If you can stop them some other way, you're obligated to do so. So we'll take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. I hope you don't stop coming to class at this point, because we really do have to qualify what we've just read. So come back tomorrow and we'll qualify it.
I'm dying to know what happens next.
I hope you don't die. God